I'd like to talk to you today about the science of goal setting. And it really is a science because studies show that there are certain things that if we do these things or bear them in mind, then we're far more likely to achieve our goals, from the smaller goals even to the larger and more challenging goals. So I'd like to share with you a series of tips that work. And also, I'll talk to you about a science-backed goal-setting technique that I find really helpful and really powerful as well. So let's dive right in with some of these tips. So the first thing I would say is choose goals that inspire you. You know, set your goal to be something that really excites you, that really sets you on fire. Otherwise, we might not feel as motivated to act on our goals, because it's very important when we are pursuing something, we're trying to achieve something, that we take action. So if it's something that really inspires you, then you're far more likely to take the actions, but also you're far more likely to keep going if things get tough or challenging further down the line. You're much more likely to persevere. Now, the second thing I would say is be specific and even stretch yourself a little bit. Now, this is consistent with Locke and Latham's goal-setting theory that found that if you're really specific and clear about what your goal is, and also willing to challenge, to stretch yourself a little bit, then we're far more likely to achieve our goals. And one of the reasons for that is I think each of us are far more capable than we realise. So sometimes if we set a goal that stretches us, we actually tap into and unleash some of this capability that we have, some of us, locked up inside of us, and we don't really get a chance to stretch our wings. So this gives us that little chance to stretch our wings and demonstrate to ourselves and everybody else that this is what I'm capable of. Number 3, I would say, is write your goals down. Now, studies show that if you write your goals down, then you're far more likely to achieve them than if you just keep the goal in your head. And now there's a range of different statistics out there, ranging from 20% to 50% more likely. But regardless of the number, the bottom line is, if you write your goals down, you're far more likely to achieve them than if you just keep them in your head. Now, one of the reasons for that is if you just keep your goal in your head, then it can sometimes get lost among the thousands of other thoughts floating around your mind during the day. And sometimes, you know what it's like, life sometimes pushes you and pulls you from side to side, backwards and forwards. And sometimes among the weight of many other thoughts, the goal can just sort of get lost temporarily. But if you have it written down, then every time you see it, it focuses your attention. Because I think of goals as things that orient us. You know, it's like a compass. It helps you to find your direction, because the more often you can focus on your goal, then the more likely you are to achieve it. So having your goal written down and even carry it around with you is a really good way to orient yourself. And when I say carry it around, you know, some people like to have it, you know, up in their wall. Absolutely great. I do something kind of similar. But create another version. You know, you can make 2 copies of it and carry the other one in your bag, your purse, in your pocket, in your wallet, whatever. And just from time to time, just take it out, have a wee read in it again. As life pushes you that way, and the breeze of life just nudges you from side to side, it just helps you to continue to orient yourself and focus in the direction you want to go in. Now, another really important thing to do is break goals down into smaller chunks. And this is a really cool science-backed way to help you to achieve your goals, because sometimes when we set our challenging goals, we're really pumped up and excited, but sometimes if a goal seems too big or too far away, it can actually cause us to feel overwhelmed, or even cause us to procrastinate. For example, let's suppose you have a goal that I want to run a marathon, or I want to run a half marathon. Now that can seem distant and a big task, especially if you haven't run much before, and especially difficult in these mornings where it might be occasionally cold or wet or windy. But if you chunk your goal up into smaller chunks, then it becomes far more accessible to you. It's like, pardon me, it's like it's easier to walk up a flight of stairs to get to a certain height than it is to scale a wall. So for example, rather than having the goal to run a marathon, that can still be your goal, of course. But if you break it up into little steps, little chunks, then maybe your chunks can be, I will run 2 kilometers 3 times this week. And then every single time you run a 2K, it becomes a mini achievement in itself. And it becomes a great achievement when you get to the end of the week and you've done 3 actual running sessions. So by breaking it up into little chunks gets you that little hit of dopamine, because dopamine is produced in the brain. You know, the reward chemical it's produced, it excites you and motivates you. It gets produced not just in the achievement of a goal, but through the pursuit of meaningful goals. So if you chunk your goal up into smaller chunks, then each of them becomes your little dopamine hit. You get excited about making your 2K run today and your 2K run a couple of days later. And then you can gradually increase how much you're running each time, but it becomes these little steps on way. And so that it's not just the main goal that's your source of excitement, but you get excited about the mini chunks all along the way. Now, an extension or a slightly different version of that can be helpful is to try to turn some outcome goals into process goals. In other words, rather than having a final target to achieve, turn your goal into a process. Let me give you an example. Suppose that you had a goal to lose 5K or 10K in weight, and that might be a challenging goal that excites you. But sometimes it might be helpful to reframe that goal as a process goal. And the process goal becomes, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week. I'm going to do 3 gym workouts a week. And now that becomes something similar to the last step, something that feels quite achievable. And then the side effect is that you might lose 5 or 10K, but your main focus becomes the process rather than the outcome. Of course, in the back of your mind, you still have that 5K or that 5 kilograms or 10 kilograms as a target, but the main goal becomes carrying out the process. So it can be just helpful sometimes just to not all goals are you can reframe that way, but some goals, it's helpful to reframe them from an outcome goal to a process goal. Now, another helpful tip I would say is make a goal part of your identity. And again, this doesn't necessarily apply to everything, but it can apply a lot of the time. So let me explain what I mean here. Let's suppose, I'll use one of my own types of examples because I write books. I've written 12 books actually. And so if your goal is, I want to write a book, then you can make that even stronger and become even more inspired and motivated by reframing it as, instead of I'm going to write a book, make it part of your identity. I am a writer and I'm writing a book. Again, let's use the running example. I'm going to run a marathon. I am a runner or I am an aspiring runner and I'm going to run a marathon. So by bringing it home into part of your identity, sometimes it can get stronger roots and it can feel more real and powerful, and it can develop more motivation, more willpower and staying power if things get challenging further down the line. And the final tip I'd like to offer you is visualize. Now, in many ways, your brain doesn't distinguish between real and imaginary. So if you repeatedly, and I'm suggesting every day or every other day, visualize achieving your goal, visualize what that would be like to be living the dream, living your actual goal. In some ways, that is processed in the brain as if it's really happening. So what begins to happen consciously and unconsciously is some of your actions and behaviors start to become aligned with what they need to be for the achievement of your goal. And it happens consciously you feel inspired, but sometimes it becomes unconscious as you begin to create neuroplasticity in the brain. In other words, when the reality of the goal, as far as your brain is concerned, becomes wired into the brain, then some of our unconscious behaviours become really aligned, and we feel somebody's motivated to go that way, or speak to this person, or do that particular action, because we're literally wiring it into the brain. So our actions and behaviours and our thinking and beliefs begin to fall into alignment with what they need to be for the realisation or the manifestation, if you like, of the individual goal. And part of that process is activation of what's called the reticular activating system of the brain. That's a wee network of cells that just sort of draw your attention to meaningful things, so things that are connected to the realisation of your goal, so that you can then act on these particular things. I'd now like to talk to you about one of my favourite goal setting practices, and this has been really well researched in science and found to be really, really helpful for helping people to achieve large goals, small goals, intermediate sized goals, health goals, practical, lots of different types of goals. And it's called the WOOP method, WOOP, and WOOP stands for wish, outcome, obstacle and plan. And in that word obstacle there is how the WOOP method differentiates itself from many other types of goal setting practice. Now when I initially learned goal setting years ago, it was all about being positive and refusing to entertain any negative thoughts whatsoever, and I always believed that you've got to be positive all the time, and never even consider a negative thought or an obstacle along the way. Now, the WOOP method embraces the fact that life happens, and getting from A to B, where A is where you are and B is where you're trying to get to, the goal in life is rarely a straight line. Mostly what happens is it sort of goes up and down, and sometimes twirls around and meanders. If it's anything like me, it twirls around, meanders, comes back to the point, and then a way up, and finally you get there. But it's not really a straight line. It's more of a meandering kind of line as we meet, as life presents us with obstacles and challenges. And these are internal as well as external. I'm not just necessarily referring to the external, physical things that happen, with resources and time and all these things, but the internal challenges we can address with the WOOP method, like motivation, like self-belief, or having courage, and these sorts of things. So what the WOOP method does is encourage you to list what you think might be obstacles along the way, and I would say my experiences particularly draw your attention to the internal ones, the ones that are closer to you, and it also really builds self-awareness, which is a very, very important practice in and of itself. So for example, let me give you an example. Let's say this is a real one for me. You might say, okay, I'm trying to write a book. Now, an obstacle might be those days where I just don't really feel inspired. I just can't seem to get the creative juices flowing. So what you do is you note that as an obstacle, and then the next step of the WOOP process is plan, is where you write down how you will meet and overcome that obstacle. So for example, and usually you can frame it as an if-then statement. If I find that I'm struggling to get into the writing vibe, then I will, and this is one of my practices I've developed, I will choose a random object and just describe it. Now this I found really helpful. Like a random object, I might see an apple, and I'll just start describing the apple. Well, it's red, it's got a little bits of green in the side, a wee stalk at the top, and I can imagine if I cut it, I can see the individual little seeds. And the moment I start describing something, it gets your fingers typing on the keys, or it gets your hand moving, and suddenly it helps me to fall into that kind of fluid, creative state. So by anticipating the obstacles further down the line and planning for them, it means that an obstacle doesn't just hit you in the face. A challenge doesn't just arrive unexpectedly and you're then sitting figuring out, how do I overcome that? You're pre-planning And it's not about negative thinking. It's about just recognizing that life occasionally, and very often actually, if I'm being honest, sends us obstacles and challenges that help us to become bigger, better versions of ourselves. So we may as well acknowledge the reality of those things and, if we can, note them down and pre-plan for them. Let me just give you, because I'm a writer and a speaker, another one for me is, if I find that working in the office at home is too distracting because, there's other things to do, and sometimes when it's mentally challenging, it becomes easier to stack the dishwasher or to put a washing on or stuff. So if I find working in my office at home, writing in my office at home is too distracting, then I will take my laptop and I will do some writing in a coffee shop. And that's something I learned several years ago. And as a consequence, I've written 12 books, working on number 13 as of the day I'm recording this video. Most of the drafting I've done of these books over the years has actually been in coffee shops. So by identifying the challenge and knowing how I overcome it, it means it doesn't feel like an insurmountable, oh my God, another thing that's gone wrong. It's like, I know how to deal with this because I've already written a plan. So you have wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. Now with wish, you basically just state your goal. Outcome is when you describe your goal. So this is the bit that you would visualize. So when you do your daily visualization, what you're visualizing is the outcome. So for example, I want to own my own house, for example, is your wish. Outcome is what does it look like? Where is it? How many rooms has it got? And you visualize yourself moving in and through your house and all that. That's the bit that you visualize. And then you get to obstacle, and then you get to plan. And plan, as well as being planning to how you overcome the obstacles, plan is also your detailed plan if you chunk it down into little things. So I'm going to do this, I'll run 3 times a week, and then 3 weeks time I'll increase that from 2k every day to 2k every other day and 5k on a Sunday. And when you start to make your more detailed plan for achieving your goal. So plan has 2 parts. It's planning, how do I overcome the obstacles, and what's my plan for achieving the goal. So there you go, the science of goal setting. I sincerely hope you found this video helpful and the advice I've offered helpful today. So good luck. I really wish you all the best in the pursuit and the enjoyment of the achievement of your goals.